Hey, good day, everybody. I'm Marty Walser, Raging Owl Bear on social media, and I wanted to talk just quickly. I don't want to do a super long video on this, although this is a topic that probably could go for hours, possibly. There's whole books written on it, let's just say. But um, I want to talk just real quickly about game prep. And, there was a little bit of debate on social media that sort of said somebody who considered themselves a high prep dungeon master, high prep game master, was getting a little bent out of shape because he thought a lot of the DM prep advice was, oh, if you're spending too much time, you're doing it wrong, or if you can't work off 3 sentences on an index card, then that's no good, or stuff like that. But basically, he was feeling a little bit anxious or attacked, maybe, I don't know, about the fact that he was a high prep game master, and a lot of the prep sort of advice out there is focus down to smaller, less is better, smaller is better, tight focus. And I want to talk a little bit about that, but I think we need to define what we mean when we're talking about prep, because I actually think there's different levels of game prep and there's gray areas between those levels. Because really, when you're talking about prep, there's sort of, like I said, maybe I think three sort of levels of prep, so to speak. There is what's going on this Friday or this Saturday at the upcoming session. What does the immediate session need in terms of preparing for the game? The next level up is, what is the campaign need over the next several sessions, or long term? What are the longer arcs that are in process? And then there's the third level, which is kind of the world building, isn't tied to a particular session, but is just kind of fleshing out things that are in your world. So let's talk about what the needs are for each of those levels, and where there's sort of not really pros and cons, but where they can take away from your total prep or add to it. Or actually, let me rephrase that. We all have a limited amount of time. It's not like we can spend tons and tons of time on our campaign, unless you're very young, high school, college, and you can get your homework done pretty quickly, and then you have like several hours, so that's the week, to prepare for the weekend session. You might have a ton of time to prep, but that's not most of us. Most of us, are probably past our college ages. We're working, we're doing home life, maybe we have a family. We get together a couple times a month, 2-3 times a month, with some close friends for a few hours. So there's different needs even between sort of different game styles. But I'm going to try to talk mostly about the typical gamer, which is, you're only going to get a couple hours during the week, maybe, of free time if you're lucky. So probably the most important thing is, what is the goal you're looking for out of your prep? And focus on that goal to make your prep better. So if you're just thinking about, what am I doing on Friday? You don't really want to be world building on a grand scale, writing up histories or detailing kingdoms or towns down to the most menial NPCs. You need to focus your prep on, because you have a limited amount of time, you need to focus on what will make my game better this weekend. And that's not to say at all that, world building is bad, or campaign building is bad. But it's more about, like, I only have a certain amount of time. What is going to most benefit my game in the short run, given that I only have a limited amount of time? So, in that instance, you do want to focus your prep to just the session, or 1 or 2 sessions upcoming, And so you want to focus the prep on what are the big encounters that are probably coming up? What are the goals of the party? What specific things are going to interest my players as players, not just as their PCs. I mean, their PC motivations are important, but what do my players like out of the game? What are they looking for out of the game? And so if you are sort of focusing on those immediate needs, you know, I have an encounter coming up. I need to know what the stat blocks are. I need to know what the terrain is like. I need to think about what the monster tactics might be. I need to think about, is there a combat alternative? Can they talk their way out of it? Is there some other hook that I can give them so that I can turn it into a role-playing encounter? You know, you want to kind of cover all the bases of the encounter so that because if that's going to be the key piece of your session upcoming, you don't want to necessarily spend a lot of time on some other goal and then not be ready to run the encounter smoothly. So, you know, you have to take that into consideration. What is my goal? So, you know, session prep clearly on the priority scale, you know, is actually here. So it's almost like session prep, campaign prep, world building. And so session prep is on that highest tier. So if you're a new DM, you might get all excited about building out your world, and you might get all excited about all the potential and making up new NPCs and thinking about new towns and places that the players can go explore and stuff like that. And that's great. That's, you know, definitely make time to write down your ideas. But if your time is limited, it's better to stay focused on your immediate need. And again, if you're having those ideas and you're like, I need to write at least some notes so I don't forget later, you know, absolutely, you know, write down a couple sentences of, this is the thing I thought about, and, you know, 2-3 sentences of, I'm going to come back to this later, you know, just like quick notes, so that when you do come back for it later, you can be like, oh yeah, I remember I was mulling over this idea. But again, you know, if your time is limited, focus on what's going to make the game that's coming up this weekend or next weekend exciting. You know, what are the fun possibilities of the encounter, be it terrain, be it, you know, cool things the monsters can do, stuff like that, you know. And then, of course, what are your players' motivations? Not just their characters' motivations, but what are their motivations? Do they like the puzzle stuff? Do they want to role play? Do they want to, you know, be swashbuckly? You know, do they want to have opportunities to jump from tables and swing across ropes and, you know, whatever, cross dangerous ravines? You know, are they pulpy, or are they? You get the idea. The point is that your prep should think about how to get your players engaged, primarily, and then secondary, how to get their characters engaged. Of course, you know, if their characters have ideals, motivations, flaws, you know, those things that we kind of take for granted on the character sheet, aside from our combat stats, you know, what is driving our characters to do the things they're doing. And if you can think about how the play of the upcoming sessions impacts their characters and drives them, motivates them based upon, you know, the role-playing goodness that they've written down on their character sheet, you know, their traits, bonds, flaws, whatnot. If you're playing D&D, or, you know, the other games have very similar things, you know, what are their driving goals? So try to, from a session prep standpoint, think of those things. Now, stepping back from that, maybe you don't necessarily have an encounter that they're going to jump into immediately next session. There's a lot of times we end a session after a big battle, and, you know, we need to think about, what are they doing next? You know, what hooks do we want to go? And so that gets from sort of the prepping the session into the gray area of stepping up to prepping the campaign. And if you have the time, you know, you want to think about not just next session, but 2 sessions from now, 3 sessions from now, are the things that you can, threads that you can spool out to them, so that you will know where they're going. You will have a plan for the choices that they are likely to make. Because if you're not running something that's very railroady, if you're not running a very straight line plot adventure, and I'm not going to get into sandboxes and railroads in this video, but if you're trying to give them that freedom to move around, you do have to think about, from a prep standpoint, where are the walls to the sandbox? How many hooks do I have out there for them? And possibly even ask them, hey guy on the Facebook group. I do this on we have a little private Facebook group for my D&D group, and sometimes I'm like, hey guys, I don't really know what you're doing next. We ended the session and we kind of we didn't really have a plan for what's coming up. What do you guys have in mind? And let them discuss it in the open forum to say, oh yeah, we have this pot hook and we have this pot hook, and maybe we'll go do this thing and they'll go that thing. Let them make the decision so that when you are doing your prep, you will be ready for whatever they decide, because not everybody is an improv GM. I've been gaming for many, many, many years, and sometimes I'm awful at improv. I mean, I seize up, I get those sort of brain freeze, like, oh shit, I don't have anything ready, and they're going this way, and I thought maybe they were going this way, and I need to think of something, and blah 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 blah. Anyways, I have difficulty with that too, even after many years of DMing. I consider myself a pretty high prep DM, because I need to think about what are they likely to do, what are and a perfect example is just last week. I was up like super late trying to prep what I thought they were going to do, where they were headed. And it was last minute. I didn't have a lot of time during the week. So I was like, all right, I gotta, Thursday night, I gotta be up and, make notes or do whatever, or even just brainstorm and read in the adventure where I thought they were going, because we're running Storm King's Thunder right now. And I got all, jittery about, like, well, I don't know what they're doing. I don't know where they're headed. And so I did. I put out the message on the boards. I said, what are you guys going to do? And then they kind of said, oh, well, I think we're going to do this. So I started to prep that and all that. But then I realized there was a whole, like, travel montage I needed, in a sense. The where they were and where they needed to be were pretty far apart. And I've hand waved a lot of travel, and I don't always want to do that, because it makes, these are supposed to be kind of journeys that they're going on from time to time, especially if it's a big distance that they have to travel to get from, like, this place they are to the place they need to be. So I had to kind of come up with something on the fly and be like, oh man, I need and so I had prepped all this stuff about, like, where they were going to be at point B. But then when the day of the game came, I realized to myself, oh wow, I'm not going to be able to use any of that, because there's this whole other sort of stuff that they need to do in between. So it happens to the most experienced of us, where you get caught up in the prep of one thing and your players do something completely else. The good news is that I had one of my moments of inspiration where I did have, because of previous brainstorming world building kind of prep that I had done, I had an idea for what I wanted to do. And so that sort of brings me to that sort of next step, is that the campaign prep, obviously session prep to work on this weekend, but then the campaign prep is like, what do we have 2-3 weeks from now? Or, what is sort of not the huge arc, but what's the little arc that they happen to be on right now? What's the story hook that they're trying to gather? Or if they're not on a hook or finished a hook, what are the 2 or 3 hooks that I might have at the ready that I can lay out for them? And then no matter which one they pick, I'll have something for them to do, because I can think, okay, I've got these 3 things. I'm going to tease those 3 things and let them choose. You don't want to give them 10. You don't want to give them, like, too much is too little is railroady. Too much is too, analysis paralysis, so to speak. Give them a few things and have those few things on a back burner somewhere. And so you do those campaign prep level stuff where you say, if they take this hook, this is kind of what I'm going to do. And if they take this hook, this is where I'm going to lead them and what I want to do. And if they take this hook, and you can write them down as very generalized notes. They're not, you're not planning every encounter down to the last ball bearing that the rogue is going to throw on the stairs. You're really just doing the high level stuff, and then so you can kind of do the plot teasing during that session, maybe throw in a fight, but you're not planning a big encounter. You're just planning the next series of little things that you're going to do, and then you have obviously some sort of big encounter or boss fight or whatever. But again, that's like you're not really improving because you've pre-thought some of these pathways. You've during your campaign prep, you've said, hey, there's all these little mini story arcs that I'm thinking about, and maybe I've made a little bulleted list of, this villain's going to do this, or there's trouble at this town because of something, because it's just some random monster, or there's, you have whatever, your 2 or 3 ideas that you're going to tease out to them, and you just have enough, you've previously put enough detail into them that you can kind of play in the session. You're not truly improving because you've thought about it before. You've planned some of it, but you have it off the cuff. You have it ready for when they make a choice that maybe you weren't thinking about in that moment. So again, that's sort of the campaign level prep, and going along with that is also doing a little bit of world building, but locally. If they're in a particular town, you think about what are the things that they might be doing in that town, or what are the things that are attracting them in that region. So you're doing world building, but you're focused just on the region that the PCs are currently in, or will be arriving in very soon. So there's that level. And then there's the world building, which a lot of times some of the advice you see sometimes on the internet is like, don't write all this campaign backstory that your PCs, that your players will never see. And I half agree and half disagree with that statement. Let me qualify. There is the part of D&D and D&D world building in particular where you are just trying to be creative. You're brainstorming ideas. You're writing, stuff that, maybe your players might not see, but really what you're trying to do is just kind of spool out ideas from your brain and see what sticks, like see what ideas interest you on the campaign level. So I'm not, against world building. And I think some of the DM prep advice that's out there that says avoid world building because your players will never see it, it's not entirely wrong, because again, depending on how much time you have, you do want to focus on the upcoming sessions. But if you have those gaps, or you have the time where you're not really certain what's coming up the next few weeks, and you want to think about that on a larger scale, then you kind of start to do that world building brainstorm. You think of what's a town that's nearby. It doesn't necessarily mean they're going to go to that town, but you now have jotted down some notes about that town and a couple major NPCs that are in it, so that you might have it at the ready at the drop of a hat. If they say, hey, we're going to go over here on this place on the map that we've never been, you'd be like, oh, hey, I have a town. I can just kind of sneak it in there. And that's the other thing. With the world building stuff, you don't have to put everything geographically from the get-go. Sometimes it's better to just have ideas, lists of ideas, and notes on those ideas, and drop them in where you need them. Because maybe that town that you thought was going to be in the west needs to be in the east, or vice versa, whichever direction they're going. Now, that doesn't mean you haven't made a map, or maybe you haven't made a map. Honestly, some people never make a map. They just start to talk about what's here and there, and it's up to the players to figure out, hey, and the DM might just be totally making it up on the fly. Oh, yeah, there's a town that's, 25 miles that way. It's 2 days travel. Just a little bit, lots of hills, and you have to go through forest, whatever. And now all of a sudden there's a town there that the DM had never really thought was there before. And it's not, the DM doesn't necessarily have a campaign map. If you're a new DM, maybe maybe make a little bit of a map, or at least something that you can later write, scribble that little point and write that town in where it didn't exist before. So that way, at least you can stay consistent when the players are like, oh, wait, I thought that town was supposed to be the east, and you're telling me it's the west now. Oh yeah. You're right. Anyways, I'm getting off the rails already. So the point on the world building thing is that it's a lone fun time. It's what people call a lone fun time. You're playing D&D in a sense by yourself. You're thinking of cool ideas and saying, "Oh, wouldn't it be neat if this happened?" And what major villains can I introduce? What is there a history that might come into play with this town, with this kingdom? And so those exercises, those world building exercises, there may be times that, your players may never encounter the thing you were thinking about. You might write lists of ideas, so you have a bullet point and then 3 sentences about that bullet point, ruined castle at the edge of blah, blah, blah swamp. And then here's 3, things. Those are great though. That level of world building is great, especially if you can move it around to where you need it. Should you write a 400-year backstory about, the kingdom and who ruled it when and what noble houses are fighting over? I mean, if you really want, great. If that is fun for you, then I'm not going to tell you don't have fun doing that. But you just need to be cognizant of what is going to make your game better in the short term. And focusing more tightly around where your players are, or at least where they're going to be within several sessions, is a better use of your time. Well, okay, I'm sorry. I shouldn't say that. It's not necessarily a better use of your time, but because world building is good. I like world building too. I love just writing down ideas and notes and doing that kind of thing. And those do add to your campaign over the long haul. But I just mean, if your time is constrained for this weekend's game, you might want to focus more on that rather than the larger campaign arcs and the larger histories and the NPC that's 1,000 miles away from where they are right now. Don't try to keep in close to where your players are. And again, it's all about time. If you have lots of time, if you've spent an hour prepping for this weekend and you're like, I'm good, I know what's going on this session, then absolutely take that. If you have another hour available, take that hour to work on the next 2-3 sessions or to work on the world. It's prioritizing, it's time management, it's project management in a way. These are your real world skills coming to bear in your D&D game, because you have to focus on the immediate deliverable to get in terms of project management and software management and whatever. The immediate deliverable is what your little programmers in your brain need to be working on. What's the compile for this week, which is your session, versus what's the next sprint. Yeah, sorry, I'm getting way inside baseball. You probably know what I do for a living. But lastly, to try to wrap this up before it goes too long, there are times when you want to, and I do this too, when you're working on prep, especially 2-3 sessions out, you want to be careful not to get so in love with those things that you've prepared that if your players go in another direction, you try to force them back. I mean, that it's a very, and again, this gets back to sort of that railroading idea. It's really hard to give your players a lot of freedom and still, again, manage your game with a small amount of prep time. And then sometimes you're like, I have this really cool idea for an encounter, and I think my players are going to love it, and blah, blah, blah. And you focus really hard and you do a lot of prep time on that encounter, and they've decided that they're just going to go in another direction. you're going to be very strongly tempted to reroute them, and just try not to do that. You want to let them take the reins, let them guide the horse of the campaign. Now, that doesn't mean all of your prep will go to waste on that encounter, because you can reuse the ideas, and you could even move the encounter depending upon what it is to another area. But the point is that don't get so married that you force them into a situation that they're actively avoiding. Especially if you're like, oh, hey, you throw out that pot hook and you're like, you guys need to fight the fire giants because they're doing this thing, and they're like, holy shit, fire giants, we're not ready for fire giants, we'll come back to that later, we're not going there. And you're like, and then you force them into the fire giant fight. Don't do that. If they are clearly like, if their characters, the players and their characters, are making that choice to say, we don't want to do that thing, or maybe later but not now, then respect their wishes. Come up with something different. And it's really hard, especially for those of us who are high prep DMs, to let go of those things that are, really, really, you've sort of not fallen in love with, in a sense, that you've like, oh, I think this is such a great idea, and I think it's going to be so much fun, and so you're getting really excited about it, and then they go the other direction, and you're like, you have to accept that some of these things that you do are going to go out into the ether and never come back. On the other hand, you can reuse them. So, and lastly, there's another thing that I do as a high prep DM that I probably shouldn't, but I do the same thing. Sometimes I get an idea for an encounter or something that they want to do, and I want to not just think of what I'm going to do about the encounter, but I want to build something. I like to do a little crafting stuff. And so this is like a little side note, because there is a little bit of railroad that's involved with this. And if your players are okay with it, like my players know that sometimes I like to build something and throw it out on the table and make them go, ooh, that's kind of neat. Wow. And so they're accepting of that desire in me to, have that sort of part of the fun in D&D, because we're sharing the experience. So they'll accept a certain amount of railroad, and I don't necessarily force them to it. I'll feed them the hooks, and they'll know, hey, that sounds like an interesting hook, we'll take it. And so I do things like I build, little dungeons. I built this like water cavern that they could go into and fight some lizard man, and have this whole underground, whatever river system has it join up. This whole underground river system that I put together with cardboard and paint and this special, resin water and blah 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 blah. And I spent a lot of, actually it was not even that hard, but I spent, several nights prepping all that stuff. So when it came to throw out on the table, they're like, oh wow, that's totally cool. The nice thing about it was I knew this was the end dungeon of an adventure that they're already on. So I knew they were going to go there. So it wasn't like I was prepping on the hopes that they would choose that pot hook. They were already on the pot hook. I knew I had a couple weeks to sort of work their way up to those final few rooms in the dungeon or whatever. So I had the big encounter with the water and the lizardmen and all kinds of stuff. And there's a Hydra and everybody's like, and it was great. I mean, they loved it because the terrain looked great on the table, and we had the water, and we had the little beaches and lizard people everywhere. It was a lot of fun. Conversely, I did something else where I was building this tower that I thought they would go to this ruined tower. So I spent a lot of time like crafting this thing out of styrofoam, and I had this removable, second story and stairs and whole 9 yards. I spent a whole lot of time building up this tower, and they walked right by it. I mean, they sailed by it. I like threw the pot hook out there, but they were kind of engrossed in something else at the time. They had some other plot hook that and so they just like, they ignored it. So I spent all this time building this, this great little scenery, and didn't go out on the table at all. The cool thing about this is, again, I built this to be kind of a generic ruin, so it eventually made it to the table. And those are the types of things that I will try to craft, is something that may be specific to an encounter that I think they're going to go to, but also generic enough to be easily used. And this is, a ruined tower. Yeah, I absolutely can reuse this. And I got like I said, I have a second floor with some stairs. Yeah, I spent, a lot of time actually futzing around with this thing. And, it looks good, and it's kind of cool, and it's fun to put on the table. And anytime they go to a ruined tower, they know this is going to come out. They're like, wow, it looks a lot like the last one we were at. I'm like, yeah, well, I spent a lot of time with it. I'm going to get my use out of it. But be that as it may, the point is that, if you like to do those kinds of high prep things, if you like to make an area, a battle with cardboard and styrofoam and have levels and do stuff like that, absolutely go to town. Just be ready that if they do skip that encounter, you're going to have to let them skip it. And that work that you put into it, you're going to have to think, well, how else can I use this? That's D&D. You're making it up as you go along. Sometimes the things don't go as planned. You reuse, recycle, as it were. You take those ideas and make them into a new one. I think that's pretty much it. If you have the less time you have, the more focused you need to be on the players. If you have more time, you can focus on the 2-3 weeks out, or the sort of larger campaign region that's nearby your players. If you have a lot more time, if you find that there's a couple weeks where people can't play, so you're not going to play until whatever, it's the 4th, it's the 5th. The next game is not until the 15th or the 20th. Then yeah, you got a couple weeks where you can just brainstorm ideas about the campaign in general, about the larger story arcs. So that, I think, is the key piece of advice, is don't worry about if you're a high prep GM, or if you like to world build, or if there are things that some of the preparation advice, tutorials out there say, oh, don't do this, focus just on your players. That is true when you're talking about the individual sessions, but there's no harm, given if you have the time, to expanding that preparation into stuff that's fun for you, even if your players don't necessarily see it right away. Those larger ideas, those larger brainstorms, and just keep notes. You don't have to flesh everything out to the nth degree too. If you have that idea for the ruined tower, bullet point, ruined tower, this is the monster that's there, that layers there, this is the treasure that they might find there. Oh, by the way, I'm going to build some styrofoam, thing. So, you have your little, that is like an index card. You have an idea, you put it on an index card, or you put it on a notepad. You have several of these ideas. Keep a list for your campaign ideas. And maybe just, instead of trying to write, the what's his name? The ring cycle. You're not writing this operatic history of your kingdom and all the kings and heroes that have come before for 400 years back in time that your players will never see and or care about. Do try to focus on things that they will find engaging, because that's how your game becomes memorable. That's how you, as a DM, a game master, become better, is, focusing on the ideas that your players have given you, through their personal motivations, through their characters' motivations, through the ideals, the bonds, the flaws, the edges, depending on what game system you're playing, the edges, the flaws, or hindrances, whatever you want to call them. Absolutely focus on those, but don't feel like you can't look at the bigger pictures from time to time when you have the time for it. So I've already gone on too long. I hope that helps. If you're a newer DM, think about where your focus is, and I hope you subscribe, follow me on Twitter, and hopefully I can occasionally spill out some more advice. So thanks for listening. I'm Marty Walser, the Raging Owlbear.